Hi, this is Dr. Gus Prestera, and welcome to Changemakers. This is the first in a series of interviews that I'll be doing with leaders who are shaping the human capital development field. I hope you enjoy. Today I interview Dr. Bud Benscoter, who recently wrote an article discussing the need to evaluate the organizational impact of soft skills training. So, Bud, you've taught at Penn State and at Duke Universities, and you've been a chapter president of ISPI, and you've been a performance consultant for many years. What are you up to these days?
Well, I actually started this business, GMB Performance Group, in 2002. So I'm in my, whatever that is, 11th year now. And the first 3 years, I spent a lot of time doing work in performance consulting and evaluation in the automotive industry. So I did that for about 3 years. We moved down here to North Carolina in 2006, and I was working on a project in the pharmaceutical industry, doing 360 feedback coaching kinds of stuff. Did a lot of performance consulting training in the nuclear power industry in that time period, pretty much that same time period. You mentioned Duke University. I taught there for 4 years, and that was pretty much full time. That took a lot of time and effort. It was a wonderful experience, but I really love the consulting piece. And the last 2 years, almost 2 years now, I've been doing a lot of training and coaching in communication, leadership communication. So I'm working, well, my largest client is a big construction engineering firm, global company, and they have me running around the country doing workshops in advanced presentation skills and individual executive coaching, those kind of things. And I've really enjoyed that. So my career's kind of, in the last 10, 11 years, kind of morphed back and forth, between performance consulting, evaluation, leadership communication. So I guess in a nutshell, that's what I've been up to.
Yeah, good. Well, so it sounds like you're having fun. You're doing a fair amount of work in the communication space, and that I
Yes.
imagine is what led you to write this article. You recently wrote an article in the August 2013 edition of T&D magazine called "Prepare for Impact."
Hmm.
In it, you talked about the importance of measuring the impact of so-called soft skills, right? And things like communication skills, leadership development, emotional intelligence, and other interpersonal skills training. Now, some would argue that soft skills can't be measured or maybe aren't worth measuring. Why go through all the effort of measuring impact on these skills?
That's right. And that question actually there are probably two answers. It's sort of a two-part question. So when you say some people, and you're right, some people say, well, these things can't be measured. Well, people who say that probably ought to rethink that that statement. Everything can be measured, and certainly interpersonal skills training or pretty much anything that we commit money and effort and time to can be measured. Um, there's a you'll well later on, maybe if I get a chance to talk about some of the things that I've read that have had a lot of influence on me. Anything that a fellow named Jack Fitzends writes, he's doing a lot in human capital analytics right now. And Jack has always said that the problem human resources and training faces is we've never identified the dependent variable. So we tend to look at all the things that affect, let's say job performance or impact in the case of this discussion. And when we're really just looking at independent variables and not dependent variables, we've got to know and decide what it is we're trying to affect and then go and measure that. So the first part of your question is, can it be measured? Absolutely. It can be measured. It just takes, some conversation, some knowledge of the business and what the objectives and goals are to kind of, figure that out. So it can be measured. Is it costly? Is it time consuming to do? No, it doesn't have to be. It certainly can be, and there may be reasons when it should be time consuming and fairly, intensive, an intensive effort to do. But the situation pretty much dictates that, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about that a little bit, in the next few minutes.
Sure,
So,
and maybe we could delve into that a little bit more now. The
absolutely.
the impact, measuring impact, sometimes can be difficult or costly, or can seem difficult and costly and complicated.
And as a result, some folks say that that's why they don't do it. How would you respond? Is it really too difficult, or can it be done reasonably quickly and easily?
And it can be done reasonably quickly and easily. So in that article that you referenced that I wrote, I actually mentioned two authors, Rob Brinkerhoff, who did the success case method. It's been around now for, almost 20 years, I guess, and Dave Basarab. So if you look at the success case method, Rob Brinkerhoff's method, I mean, Rob's very quick to say that in his own experiences, he's done that kind of evaluation in a matter of days. It can be done as quickly as a day or two, as long as you understand what the limitations of the data that you're going to get from it. Or it can be, in the case of large system-wide programs, it can be months to collect the data. So it can be done. It can be done cheaply, efficiently, quickly, depending on the circumstances, right? Depending on how much time and effort and the resources that you have to do this too. I think that's probably the other part of this, Gus, is I think one of the reasons a lot of organizations don't commit to doing this is that they may lack the resources and the knowledge internally to do this. And so even our own profession sometimes, will kind of say what you've just said. Well, it just takes too much time, too much effort. You have to be a statistician to do it. And that's far from the case. So I think we just, as a profession, need to understand a lot more about what's holding us back from doing this, because it can be done successfully and pretty easily if that's what needs to be done.
Yeah, when you talk to senior leaders, and I imagine you're when you're out there doing your consulting work and also at the university, and you're talking to leaders, senior leaders, future leaders, and you're talking to them about the impact, measuring the impact of soft skills training. How are they responding? So we see a lot of pushback from people within the field, but how are those potential clients responding?
That's right. It's interesting too, Gus. I've thought about this even philosophically, that those of us who've gone through a lot of formal education, well, we're exposed to things. Maybe they were communication training, decision making, things that generally fall under the umbrella of interpersonal skills training. And we walked away from that kind of with the belief that, well, I took some things that are of value to me. Now it's up to me to figure out how to apply this. Well, now you carry that mentality over into a training organization, into a company that's committing time and money and resources to this. That answer really isn't sufficient any longer. If we're going to spend money to do the kind of things I'm doing with this construction and engineering firm, for example, I mean, I'm the first one to want to go out and say, we need to find out if this is having, an impact on the business. So to your question, when that comes up, when I bring that up very often to leaders, to senior management people, I guess if I had to summarize the answer, it's, well, that would be nice to do, but it's going to take time to do, isn't it? Or we don't have the resources to do that, or we know it's working. We just have this faith, that it's working. And I think part of that is us reflecting back on our own education and saying, I took things, it was my responsibility to take things out of what I was exposed to as it is, theirs. We don't need to measure it to find out if it's making a difference. So I think there's a lot of factors that come into play.
Sure.
In this, so.
And how do you respond to them when they say that they don't feel they need to measure?
Well, I try to remind them of two things. One is that they are making a significant commitment to this, whether they've really monetized it or not. So even in the programs I deliver for this firm, for this construction engineering firm that I talked about a little bit earlier, my class sizes are limited to 10 people. So I have no more than 10 people because it's very interactive. It's very presentation kind of thing oriented, so it has to be limited. But when you look at it, and when I remind them of how much they've spent just to send those 10 people, to a 2-day workshop, the costs begin to, kind of they have to reflect on that a little bit. It isn't just what they're paying me to do it. It's, it's the fact that they're pulling people off of their job assignment, only to go back and with some sort of blind faith, hope that, this made a difference in their job. And the other thing too, Gus, is that I try to convince them that this is not a complicated and sophisticated process. It can be, but it probably even shouldn't be at the beginning. If you're going to, so much of this is a change management effort too, right? So if you're going to move people into the mindset that they want to commit to this, that they want to find out if it's making a difference, then like everything else, it's small steps. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with that small step. And this can be a very small step, in that direction. So that's kind of the argument I use.
So, so what might be a good first step? If you're working with a client and you want to get their feet wet, what might you suggest to bite off in that first project?
So evaluating impact can be done relatively easily, relatively quickly. And let me take, for example, what I do or what I've been doing with this firm most recently. So if we wanted to evaluate the impact, as I hope they will be willing to commit to soon, to evaluate the impact of these advanced presentation skills on the job, then if I followed pretty much the methodology that Brinkerhoff suggests, we go out and we interview. First of all, we survey the people that I've trained, large group of people I've trained, to find out who is using the tools, the skills that they've learned. And the objective is to try to find the people who have been most successful in using them and those who have been least successful. So the beauty of this process is it pretty much, at least for the initial step of impact, pretty much ignores the middle group. So you want to find out who's very successful and what success means and who's unsuccessful. Now it's time to follow up and interview some of those people to find out, well, with the success group, you've been successful. What does success mean? Tell me how you've used it, how it's affected your job, and to the extent that you know this, how it's affected business goals, either your business unit's goals or, hopefully the company's goals. Now, the same questions you're asking of the people who have been unsuccessful. So you haven't had a chance to use it. Why haven't you had a chance to use it? What happened when you tried, if you did try, and what you uncover, from that, again, pretty quick process, pretty quick and easy process, is that you find out what the barriers and enablers are in the work environment that lead to successful impact of the skills you've learned and those that have been less successful. From that, yeah, right, you're nodding. So from that, you can take that data and begin to build, what Brinkerhoff calls an impact model that says for this to be successful in the future, what we learned from the successful group is, for example, their management met with them before they went to training. They shared their expectations of how this trainee was to use these skills once they've been back on the job. They followed up with them once they're back. So there was commitment, there was support in the environment. It's usually the case. It's usually what you find, that there was support for it. That then in turn feeds future training decisions once management understands what its role is. So, there's a very simple, quick and easy way to begin to find out what affects impact and then start to, push it into the organization. So.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you. So you mentioned earlier that you wanted to talk about some of the authors that had influenced you, and I'm sure that folks after they read your article Some of them will be interested in the topic, want to learn more about it. What kind of resources would you point them to?
Well, the two that I've talked more about one than the other, but the two that I mentioned in the article that I wrote, I would highly recommend people read because they're very good and very easy reads. So that's the Success Case Method by Robert Brinkerhoff, and Predictive Evaluation by Dave Basarab. I know Dave from his days at Motorola. I used to work, when I worked at Vanguard, I was an internal at Vanguard. I went out to Motorola University when Motorola University was the place to be, and they were doing such great work. And Dave was the evaluation specialist. And I had a chance to meet with him there, and then we followed up. So we kind of had a connection on the phone, and I've always sort of stayed in touch with Dave. He's got a wonderful process. I would encourage people to read it. It's more elaborate. It takes more time, takes more commitment. But unlike Brinkerhoff's method, his method is integrated into the design phase of training, where Brinkerhoff says, sort of assumes that the training's been developed, implemented, and now you're going out and finding out whether it had an impact. Basarab's saying, whoa, wait a minute, and I would agree with this, right? And I say this in the article, that evaluation really begins in the design phase, the analysis and design phase. So I tend to gravitate, I guess, a little bit more to the predictive evaluation process. So that's two, but I'm going to mention another one that doesn't sound maybe like it's going to be training, but it's something I think all of us in the training and human resource field should read, and that's Jack Fitzenz's work. In 2011, he published a book called HR Analytics, and it's a wonderful introduction to analytics in general, which is becoming the hot topic. In fact, it's the cover story on Chief Learning Officer this month, is metrics and measurement. So the field in general is gravitating more and more to metrics and measurement. And I think Jack probably does, that's J-A-C Fitzenz, Jack probably does as good a job of talking about analytics and how it can be applied to human resource management in general as anybody does. So, I would start with those three. And of course, Transfer of Training from Broad and Newstrom, which is, again, sort of a 20-year-old publication, but it's a wonderful introduction.
It works. Yeah.
It is. It's great. And so much of it has turned out to be true, statistically and otherwise. So.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives today. Really appreciate it. I hope we'll have you back at some point and you can talk a little bit more about some of the experiences you've had with clients.
I hope so. Thank you, Gus. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.